We are on the air. Hi there. I'm Chris from Airwindows, and we're going to do a little coding maintenance on the old computer. I'm not sure how much time I'm going to take with this today. We'll see. For now, there are some things that I want to do, and I have chat going. And if anybody does show up and has anything to say, I should be able to hear you. I'm not sure how well set up my mic is, though. Let me maybe fool with that. Set it there, and that should give me all the gain I need. So the question today is, what do? And I can think of some things, such as hammering away further on the mid-range peak thing I was working on, because that might be good. So for the time being, and I can switch over to answering questions for people quite easily. But for the time being, where would we leave off? Recent effects, Resi Q2. So this is what I had. I think I might have put a little more work into it before leaving off. And I can do this. But one thing I was wrestling with was there were some really weird behaviors. This is not hooked up to anything, nor is this. This stage thing turned out to be real sensitive, in that if I set it certain places, I could make it no longer do the frequency shift the way I want it. Oh, it's behaving itself fairly well at the moment, but I remember there were some settings. And again, the idea of what we're doing here is coming up with something that's going to work like the MCI mid-range boost. And that is present on a bunch of famous records, because a bunch of stuff from the Eagles to a bunch of records you can't play on stream came through MCI consoles. And the MCI console had a mid-boost peak thing that they had going on that acts kind of like a wah pedal or something, except for that its range is a little wider than that. There was also a challenge having to do with how that works with the dry-wet, because if we're going to do this, it has to operate on the basis of a dry-wet blend, rather than simply replacing everything with this output here. I have it behaving fairly well, honestly. The way this works, if I make it incredibly resonant, for some of these, and this may have been like last minute work after I left off. Don't mind me, I'm noticing that my gain is louder than it needs to be, so back the mic off and move it over to where I'm addressing the camera as well as the microphone. Reminds me to look this way. See, one of the things I was grappling with is that I have this set up. This is a wah kind of effect, similar to ResEQ, except for what happened last week when I put many hours into struggling with this one. Is it goes from a finite impulse response filter, kind of like a convolution reverb, where it took every sample and calculated how to make this. Stages is something like, oh, sorry about the blinking. Stages is like width of the, let's go and look. So this is what we are working with. It is set up so that I can specify how big I want it to be. The whole idea was to extend the range so that I could go down into deeper frequencies even at high sample rates. Because otherwise, our range, and we've got a pretty substantial pre-delay there, otherwise our range is extremely limited to only the highest of high frequencies. And that's fine, but the real deal filter let you do lower frequency stuff. And ResEQ, not so much. In fact, let's load up ResEQ and demonstrate what we started with. See, if I set these all to 0, I only have one of these in. And this particular one is recalculating it in a funny way for efficiency purposes. And if we make it do a high frequency sound, it can do that very accurately. But the lower you go, the less of a handle you have on how many samples you're using. So these low frequency sounds, and if I do reso for the other ones, they'll basically just do the same. ResEQ is for hitting these resonant peaks and then combining them, like this, and also this. And it gives you a composite sound, but we're not really thinking about that so much. We're thinking about how to use ResEQ as a simple resonant peak with more flexibility to it. And you can hear how as we go higher, like there's something that I did that helped me dial it in. And that's probably what you're hearing in the newer one. I made a special recording that is this. I'm calling it tick impulse. And what that does is it's a single peak at the highest possible rate, and then everything else is straight up silence. Or it's meant to be silence. I'm not positive it is. Let's see if this changes if I do this. No, it's silence. So if we do ResEQ, we'll see something that's happening, and that was showing me that my envelope for what I was working with in ResEQ 2 was not correct. So if we go to ResEQ and pick like a setting in here somewhere and then apply it, we'll probably have to normalize because we've made it incredibly quiet, but we can do that. And now if we go right to the beginning, we can see that this is what we got out of that particular filtering, ResiQ at that frequency did this. It's a sort of a big spike, and then a little bit afterwards, which is maybe not what I was expecting or what's particularly helpful at this very high sample rate, because this is at 44.1K. These wiggles are supersonic. The wiggles are 22K. They are what you get when you are getting Gibb effect intersample peaks. This wiggle effect is what produces the intersample peaks. We're looking at it on the screen. So let's continue to try this and make it do something. For instance, if we pick a very high frequency in ResiQ, and it's on full wet, and apply that and close, and then normalize that, we're probably going to see something that acts like a behavior, although it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. The whole idea of ResiQ was to produce this tight little convolution impulse where it would arc upwards using a sine shape to a maximum peak and then curve around and continue that outwards into a couple of wave shapes at half the attack peak. This is supposed to be doing that, but it's kind of not. Let's take that right back to our, that back as far as we can. And then let's try something else, namely ResiQ2, very high stages, very high frequency. If we apply this, probably don't even need to normalize it because it's putting out a higher output. And we're getting something that looks like a waveform. It even looks like and I wonder whether, I probably don't have this anymore. I got that from impulse responses that were done by somebody on the Noise Vault forum, which is a sound downloader forum. And they did impulses of a bunch of hardware that went into bus colors. But one of the things that they did was impulses of a massive passive, a manly massive passive. And I don't know exactly how they came about this, but something they did behaved like a sort of tight resonant band, although I don't know how you do that in a massive passive, I forget. And it looked to me as if the attack of this wave was going at about twice the rate as the decay, and then the decay was a neat sine wave. And I thought, why don't I impose that? So what I was getting in my initial experiments with this was translating the impulse into this. This is similar to using it's similar to using a reverb impulse. I don't think I have anything particularly handy for that, but one thing I can do is apply some kind of reverb impulse or something else. For instance, I could throw on like one of my bright ambiences, put it at full wet with no decay. And then when we got out of bright ambience, this is what bright ambience looks like when fed a single tick attack. It's this space, a spaced set of single tick results that are prime number spacings. And that sounds like this. That's what bright ambience sounds like. At sort of, we can normalize it since we are set to a quiet volume. bright ambient sounds like this. Because it's just a chain of echoes, and it's a chain of echoes with prime number spacings, but those are very high frequencies, and that's one of the things that you get out of primes like that. You can also, let's just set it to go. Sustain makes it a shorter window. And decay applies a dynamic to it. So what you get there and it seems to be stepped somehow, is this, is a fall off of the reverb impulses, but they're all basically the same. They are all, hello Air. This is the output of the original bright ambience. Whereas if you go to something which is designed to work, well, actually we're going to get similar results out of some of these. Let's do bright ambience 3. That's like a pre-delay. Start and length combine with each other. So a short little length. We do seem to have a pre-delay anyhow. Anyways. And then we've got our feedback, which will actually feed back. This sort of spooky little note in there. And if we apply this, and let's normalize it again. That is now stretched out over a much longer range. Although oddly we have an initial attack that is still the same volume there, so that's kind of weird. But this is what you get out of Bright Ambience 3, which is a very similar thing. But it's using what I took for the Resi Q2 is taking sine the prime impulse things. I initially started trying to take the things from this. See how they're spaced? These are not spaced both at the same, they're spaced in stereo, but they're still impulses, you see. And that's how you make the bright ambience effect out of a single tick impulse. Whereas if we do something much more exaggerated, like let's go to one of the K plugins, how about? Let's do a short K plate. And this is a much more complicated affair when we're talking about making a reverb effect. And let's normalize that. And what we get out of like one of the K reverbs is a much more complicated waveform. It's not just single ticks echoing. There's a lot more going on. And the end result if you were to do an impulse response and make a convolution impulse out of K reverb or K plate B, this is what you get on its maximum delay. Back to our initial tick. Or if you do the shortest possible delay and the maximum low cut, come on, play. It's fairly similar, but it's still got that particular kind of decay, that particular kind of behavior, which was a lot went into making that happen, I'll tell you. Whereas if you do something like, hello, Mr. Biquad, I can just barely hear this, but this is what I was comparing. Yeah, this is a literal impulse that I'm feeding into these things. So when we feed it into the biquad, we're going to have to normalize again, of course. We do not get just echoes of the single tick impulse at a high resonance of the biquad filter. We get this. This is what you get out of a extremely resonant biquad filter when you feed a single tick impulse into it. It makes this little wave that falls away like a drum hit or something, or one of the reverbs. And even though it's a high frequency tick, you can also do a lower frequency. Again, a very high Q. With that one, I definitely have to normalize it to be able to see what's happening. And there is the output of our biquad filter at a lower frequency, feeding a single tick into it. Now, what I was seeing with, like, let's assemble something out of this. We're going to undo this stuff firstly. Then let's construct an example of what I thought was, there is some feedback into a biquad, but not all. Let's duplicate this document. And then I think this is going to be silent. This is going to be Science Lab Day for the most part. And our frequency is not correlating to hertz, but $240. No, doubling it does seem to give me a neat octave change. That's kind of what I was looking for, so we're going to stay with that. 0.4 for this one and 0.2 for this one. normalize that. Normalize that. And here's what we are showing. See how we've got these two frequencies in here? And the lower frequency just instantly goes to the top of the waveform. It's not really instantly, but it's pretty quick. And then with this higher frequency stuff, let's fiddle with this a little bit. Firstly, we invert that. And then we're going to copy a piece out of this. And then we're going to trim this. So this is kind of like what I saw. Let's remove this. No, let's not remove that. Let's silence it. This looks like what I saw on the waveform that came out of the Manley massive passive. Or then again, possibly not, because it feels to me as if it was even slower. I'm trying to make it resemble what I saw on the sample coming from the actual recording of the device. I'm trying to make it do the thing. Yeah. So when I was studying, we don't need this anymore. Goodbye. When I was studying the recordings, hey, T.H. Wolf. When I was studying the recordings that the guy made of the very resonant analog filter out of the massive passive, there was a difference in that and what I got out of digital filters as follows. Hang on. Oh, stop that. That wasn't right at all. Goodness gracious, no. Hang on. There we go. Now a clear marker so we can see what we're doing. So what is at the bottom is very similar to what you get out of a biquad filter that is very resonant. If you feed a peak impulse into it, you get a rapid response that immediately clicks to the top of the wave and then starts giving you, however, the Q factor becomes this. The analog one acted like above. It acted like this, or even more so, in a sense. It was like, it looked like the shape of the waveform was curling around, and then it did a neat sort of sine-shaped roll-off at the top here. Maybe I can... What would happen if I took this and copied it? Or took that and copied it, replaced it. It was kind of like this in a weird way. Not completely, but it acted kind of like... This is, I shouldn't have closed the other file. Could I? No, I didn't save it. I'm basically just trying to reconstruct what I was seeing out of a file I had long ago. Long ago, I had this little file that was impulses recorded off of hardware analog gear from the Noise Vault forum. Oh, massive passive would not be linear phase. You can only do that in digital. Linear phase means all of this echoes, and the tail on the end of it also happens in the beginning of it. It's like a ramping up to the full wiggliness and then back down again. That's what a linear phase is. There are many reasons why that is terrible for your audio. A lot of that stuff I tend to avoid as hard as I can. So basically the deal here is that the stuff I'm doing with this mid-range business is trying to replicate what I was seeing on the top waveform, where you had the ability of an analog filter to do its sort of sustainy resonant peak. But then the attack also gets involved. A lower frequency stuff does not hit you with a high frequency spike immediately if you feed a high frequency spike into it. It always slows it down. This is probably what the phase nonlinearity is. Because this is like linear phase. If you have a peak and it goes instantly to your highest frequency and then transfers into a wave, there's a nonlinearity as it kind of stretches beyond that. And if you mirrored this on both sides of that spike, that would be a highly resonant filter for that frequency that was linear phase. I wonder if I can even demonstrate this. Let's see what we can do here. How many, can we go back to our initial? We can. So here is our tick impulse again. We just negated everything that I did for science class. And I know I've got some stuff in here like from Apple. Do I have a linear phase filter in here? I got AU filter. I know this gives some kind of additional parameters. Oh wait, there it is. We want to select this one, and then select these edges somehow. There we go. There is our extremely aggressive spike. Now we will see whether this is exactly the same as the biquad filter I had before. And signs point to yes, except for it's a little strange. Here we have our initial spike, which is, there's apparently a sample way up here somewhere. And then we have a sort of weirdly irregular looking, like my biquad filter is cleaner than this, but this is like an attempt of, it's probably because my biquad filter is capable of producing like literally raw output of the filter rather than this has dry included in it. So it's messing up the frequency a little bit as it combines dry with the output of the impulse, which is here. You can see it fading away like that. Meaning that even if just applying the dry to it at all is producing weird high frequency irregularities, we can see this is what it looks like when you've got a linear phase filter. Because twisted wave here is rendering the Gibb effect. This is the reconstruction. It's rendering the reconstruction as the linear phase filter. So this wiggling, this would be the pre-ring of the linear phase filter. Otherwise, if you didn't have any of that, it would just be a straight line and then immediately spike up to here. And there are digital to analog converters you can get that do that, that just go straight and then go to the next frequency, and they're not reconstructing, meaning that this stuff would be more sort of faceted in shape. And that also means that the reconstruction from those other kinds of playback device would not have this extra little wiggle at 22K. That being the filtering of everything above the Nyquist frequency. In order to do that and not have any artifacts, like going from a straight line to up here means there's the corner, and the corner is producing a huge amount of energy way above the Nyquist frequency. This removes that at the cost of having this pre-ring and post-ring. And the post-ring is just the same as this pre-ring, and that's what's causing this shape rather than just smoothly going through this point and becoming this. Other filters. And yeah, now I'm curious as to whether I can get a linear phase filter from anything in here. Because this is what I've got. Oh, let's look at Valhalla Room. I have purchased Valhalla things, although I don't use them because I make my own stuff. Full wet. We don't need a pre-delay. We've got early and late. And so our default setting, well, that's interesting. Why'd you do that? I may have found a bug in Valhalla Room. Or not. No, it seems fine. So when you fool with Valhalla Room in that default setting, one of the things Valhalla Room makes is this. The guts of the impulses and things in, well, let's make sure that we have what it's supposed to be. This is one way of studying things. So let's do we even have Saprum? Our champions, yeah, so I apparently don't have a default set. So let's just pick something that seems cool. Rooms. Let's pick something that's like a room. Unless anybody in chat has a preference, I'll happily show you the impulse response of anything in here. I'm just thinking, or maybe a plate. We could see what the That seems almost too simple, though. Let's do something that acts like a... That's more annoying. How about a large tiled room? Thank you, T.H. Wolf. It's nice of people to do things like that. So that is a large tiled room, and it contains some early reflections, and it contains late reflections. So the way that Sean from Valhalla made this was, and then we're going to normalize it. We can see it more easily and hear it. That's not what the previous one was, though, so I'm wondering if I can find what I had before. Is it going to remember what I just did? Yes. So I cannot literally go back, but what I could do is pick something interesting. I don't know, let's pick something like a Gothic cathedral and see what it does there. Because I had something which was a weird combination of delay and pre-effects and who knows what, with a bunch of early reflections in there. Let's pick something which shows other behaviors. Here's one. I am expecting that all of our, when we have early diffusion at 1, we're not going to have those echoes. How about large hall? Okay, that sounds like he's trying to do the lexicon thing. Let's see what that means in terms of analyzing what happened here. And our early reflections are not completely one-tick reflections. They're kind of ramping up in volume. They're definitely kind of softened even at 44.1K. So these are like single tick echoes, although this one goes up and down. And it's like there are pluses and minuses coming out of this algorithm. And then as they start stacking onto each other and we start getting regeneration, this is probably just early reflections. It's still looking very much like early reflections, but we're starting to see more stuff happening. It doesn't look as much just like this is literally smoothed single impulse spikes, like my bright ambient stuff, but different. Jess says, any erratic movement in phase leads to phase distortion, and yeah. Here's our hottest peak. So here is our Valhalla Holla. Rather lexicon inspired, I think. Those are famous. Do I have any of my old ones that used to be called verb whatever? No, but I've got stuff like verbity. So with darkness, I can soften these impulses down a lot. Minimum longness means it doesn't feed back anymore, and so all we're seeing is the direct output of this as it scales up and down. That's verbity for you. It's a particular arrangement of this stuff. So we can have a decay that is similar to the Hall reverb. It's in full wet. And then if we amplify this, we will see that the stock verbity is without any filtering. It's giving you the capacity for completely unmodulated single sample ticks. And we can filter these out by using the darkness control. And then they start combining, and there's more of them as we go on, and they get softer as we go, except for there's apparently this one left over here. And that's the output of the first verbity algorithm, which a bunch of other stuff got based on. Early householder reverb work. Whereas, excuse me, if we start doing darkness, and then let's normalize that, we'll see that although we have a similar behavior, this is a phase smear. This is softening the result with a single IIR filter. And what that does is we still have our initial attack, but then it is having the decay every time we get through. So we wind up with the capacity of smoothing the stuff off, but it's a very simple form of filtration, that is. And we can take it farther. Apply that and normalize that, and we're going to get a fairly striking result. Much darker. But you'll notice that, oh, interesting though, we're still getting our spikes, but they're a little different now. Some of them are this shape, and that's what that simplest form of IIR filter will do to a low frequency thing. This is extensive phase shift. The initial impulse was here. And that's not dissimilar to what I was seeing out of the analog filters when they had that significant sustain on things. Luke, the starter kit hasn't been changing around all that very much. There will come a time when I have probably got starter kits based around analog console emulations. For instance, when I have, an old Neve version of console, I might have stuff that includes some plugins that do effects that were present on things like that. For instance, if I was to do the TG12345 that was an Abbey Road, a natural inclusion would be to throw in K-plate, like maybe K-plate D, that being one of the older tube-based reverbs that was present in the Abbey Road studio when that desk was present. And then probably also K-chamber AR. And then you would have the emulation of the recording desk, and then you'd also have selected plugins that were designed to do stuff akin to what was available in those famous studios. But yeah, this is showing me an interesting thing. Namely, remember how I was talking about how when these waveforms got all wiggly and stuff, up and down and so on, high resonance, and I said that I recognized that there was an attack and decay shape? If this continued to resonate, which it does not, this attack is faster than this release. It's like this is a higher frequency attack, but it is still an attack going into a lower frequency section of the waveform. If I could draw on the screen the ideal shape that I would draw for this very resonant waveform would be like this for the onset, and then it would continue going into a series of sine waves that faded off that were about double the period of this attack. And that would be the optimal one. I don't have anything that really represents it, although I can show you some amusing things, seeing as it's science class day. Let's have a look at some of the other stuff that I've done. For instance, Neverland, maximum personality, and I think hardness. I don't think we're going to change drive at all. So Neverland changes a single impulse into basically this. And if I was to delete this sample, let's delete both of these samples. And then normalize it. You'll see that there's this funny quality of the Neverland is a sort of filter, but some of the stuff in here, like the way this is making this shape, the shape is not necessarily exactly a sine wave, nor is it necessarily what you see here. Like let's redo Neverland. And how about rather than, let's just clip this off the screen. Then we can see what's in here. Yeah, so that's clipped off the screen. And you'll notice that the pattern made by this decay stuff, it's not a perfectly smooth little waveform. It's not falling away exactly the way that it would if it was, in fact, a crystal. It should give you a perfect example of the calculated out version, I think. Let's find out. Crystal was designed to act like, let's see now. Let's see what we actually get. And clip it. See, this is a little closer to what you would get out of what's actually an FIR filter, honestly. But as the decay goes for something that was calculated out to be a mathematical sort of 22.050 filter, you'd get basically this. But Neverland didn't look like that. It had more going on afterwards. And so when I say that I'm making the most recent one, do this. You should be able to see the rough frequency in there. But this behavior is unusual. And I have not yet tried doing literally the sample by sample construction rather than the primized one, because one of the things that's happening here is you can see some of these samples are being skipped. It's not taking every sample. It's reaching it out farther so that we can do a lower frequency. Let's do that lower frequency, because this is something of a new thing. I'm not sure anybody else is doing this. They can if they want. It's like if people decide that they want to try something interesting, they can certainly do that. Let's do a very resonant one. And a very low frequency. And then see what we got. Yeah, see that? The reason this is kind of wacky is because some of these samples are jumping out and being weird. Like the algorithm is not ideal. But what I'm trying to make happen with this is a decay behavior where it's applying a dynamic envelope onto the staggered. You can just about see which of these in the waveform of a very low frequency sound. And I can't explain these here, these ones that are going higher than they should. But you can kind of see where the main spacing of the prime number counted stuff, as it extends outwards on this very low frequency wave, it's only going this far. This is as far as the impulse stretches. But we're doing it on a super low frequency thing, and this is one of the things that's causing the because we have this scattering of prime numbers, and the reason I'm doing it that way is because I'm wanting to stretch it farther. Honestly, I'm not sure that's working. It's possible that I'll do just as well without doing the fancy, only taking a smattering of, because remember when I showed you the result of bright ambience, and you saw how that reverb effect was just a succession of tick impulses coming out, and they were spaced according to, see, the way this is working is I'm using this, like fall off is this, and that's one of the things that I did after last stream. It's not supposed to be one-sided though, there's the thing. I've just got too low a frequency. But what's confusing me there is the unpredictability of some of that stuff. I might do just as well to do a coarser version of, oh, chamber IR, no, I'm not sure if I ever did the reverb based on Fibonacci numbers, did I? That might be, is that what we did? Sure, why not? And when I'm finished doing that, what I'm going to do is I must go and update these so that it applies all of the frequency wavepoints. But then does not apply it this way. Like, essentially, this is supposed to work. Some things about this aren't working, and so I'm looking to amend that. I will in a moment. I've got another thing to try. Let's undo that. Let's undo everything. And just before we try that, I want to overhaul this. Take it down to the low mid-range. And what do we get? After normalizing it, of course, so that it's visible on the screen. Then I'll show you the thing. See, this is what I'm trying to make, except for that the prime spacings, the whole idea of that was so that I could have the same number of delay taps but cover a wider range. This is what I wanted, but it's got way too much high frequency mush going on in there, and it's very unpredictable. Like here we have the tail end of that decay. You can see where the sine would go, right? See how this is doing its thing? That stuff's perfect. That's exactly what it's meant to be. But because I'm spacing it out the way that I am, we got a bunch of weird things going on. And that's causing me some issues as far as tightening it up, making it do what I want. So before I move onwards into actual work, let's try to do the thing. I believe it was, yeah, let's chamber, so, and it would have been the first one, I believe. Let's go and find that. So, chorus, channel, capacitor. Let's do the original chamber. Here's our bigness. Lightness is a high pass. Darkness is the same low pass we had before. We want just the output. And that should give us a little glimpse of what this makes. So, moment of truth. Jazz, this is what the Fibonacci number, or whatever it was, does. And if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be a little weird. But then when we start putting in reverb, when we start putting in sustain, it turns into something entirely different. There you are. Here's our initial sound. And this is what we get out of that behavior. It's a spacing of positive and minus negative echoes. And then they're gone. It is this pattern. Then, when we take our original chamber, and we can have very extended sustain, but we don't necessarily want that, but we can tighten it up. Smallest available chamber, and a little longer, I think. And then when it's feeding back on itself even a little bit, what we get out of it is thus. See, starts out as just our raw initial early reflections. But then as they get more complicated, when we have another, it's a funny additional peak that stacks up in there somewhere. That's popping up, and I think that's a consistent factor with some of these. And that be what it sounds like. Just for fun, let's undo past all of that, and let's see what happens if we have a much more extended decay. And this isn't only a 1 second thing, so let's not even go there. Instead, we're going to insert some sound, or insert some silence, more like. I'll undo everything past that in a moment. We should be able to get something out of this if our initial tick is still there, which it should be. Let's go and find out whether all of our stuff is still in place. How about? I might have to undo past that. I will. I think I replaced the entire thing for some reason. We need to have that still be there. Let's insert silence at that point. There we go. Now we have a long silence, but we still have our initial tick. So I want to see how smooth our sustain is on this initial chamber. So let's put it to full longness. Maybe about the same bigness, honestly. And that will gradually sustain, and then we'll apply it. And here's the interesting thing. Here's our initial sustains. Here's our attack. Here's a funny spike for no good reason. I don't know where that's coming from. It's weird. But it doesn't repeat, ever. Everything else stays smooth. How smooth? Let's find out. We'll delete that, and then let's normalize what's left. Here's our long extended reverb decay. And we don't see any repeating patterns in it. So, move to start. Sounds like this. No darkening or anything. That's the thing about some of these techniques, is you feed them back onto each other and they wind up having a nice sustained performance there, where it'll be a smooth reverb tail even if it's not a sophisticated algorithm. And again, this is just a single sample. Giving you the result. So there you are. There is a chamber. So where I was at with my little single sample 1 second thing is exploring this. And if we increase this even more, we'll see that my experiment with the spacing stuff out using a sine wave is maybe not awesome. That is maybe not great. It might be worth me figuring out a different algorithm to do that, because what I'm doing with it doesn't seem awesome. I'll tell you why I'm doing it that way, though. This is at 44.1K. The idea is that I can set it up so that if you're running at a much higher sampling rate, we should still have our single sample tick. This is now running at a much higher sampling rate, to the point where I'm not sure it's even going to play back nicely. And it's obviously much quicker. That should be about the same frequency, because you want it to be the same frequency in all sampling rates. If it's going to be in a console emulation, I gotta have that mid-range frequency working consistently. Now we have our simple single sample impulses, and they are making the same basic frequency curve, but a lot more of the ones in the middle are silence. And the playback of it is only applying this many delay taps. It's like it's generating a convolution reverb out of a sine-shaped EQ curve. Yeah, Jess, a bunch of things have circular buffers of various kinds. Some of the older ones had double-length buffers in which it would do calculations and be able to not do constant bounds checks by automatically writing beyond the edge of the buffer, so that you could cheaply and easily check beyond the bounds checks and still get good data. And current ones, since maintaining extra variables is more costly than doing extra math in modern processors, and so the modern ones are doing circular buffers and just doing the bounds checks on every little calculation, because that's faster than running a bunch of extra variables. But this is what I've got in the high sample rate stuff. The problem is that's generating so much high frequency hash that's not especially helpful. It's not really making a reverb impulse like thing. It's just making a frequency, and the range that it goes is the same range. Like, see how we've got like high, low, high-ish, low, and it does this many out to about 2.5 milliseconds. I change everything back and then go and do exactly the same thing, only now we're at 44.1K. And at 44.1K, there's a bunch of work I need to do on this. We'll maybe spend the last 45 minutes of this stream fooling with this a little more. Because I'm telling you, like I said, this is meant to be a sort of curve-like result. And I did some work on it that improves that behavior. The problem is what I'm getting out of these spacings as I use the prime numbered spacings of only taking some of the impulses and not others is generating this nasty, gritty result. And because it's prime spacings, it's scattering these things more interestingly, but it's still an ugly interaction up around the Nyquist frequency. Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is about as bad as the pre-echo from a phase linear filter. So what I'd like to do now is do a quick hack and address that. If we've got pre-delay, that represents P. P is primes. If I don't use primes here, this part will still be relevant. But every time I use px, I just switch it to x. And fx is the point that I am getting to. So this is the measurement of the output value. And what's happening is we're spacing this out so that we can take each, instead of being like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., it's skipping into all the prime numbers. And then the sine algorithm, it's like, okay, if we did that, where would our sine be when we caught up to it? So I have to make it complicated there by making the sine shape continue itself, but catching up to where it would be if the spacing was different. And now here's where we're actually calculating. Here's where we have our little ring buffer. That's what this is doing. We're putting that in, and then we're taking stuff out here. I got it to work. So XO offset, we are not using prime x, we're just using x. We might be able to incorporate this in some other way, but it might be fine. What's PS? Where did I get PS? Overall scale times 0.25. I don't know why I'm calling it 0.25. I'm thinking that's because the prime numbers were spaced out a certain way and I was making them densely spaced so that I could cover more. I don't actually need to do that. Let's see what happens when we don't. PS equals overall scale. And it's a double precision number. Int cast into double times PS, which is double, times freq, which is going to be it. Yep, it's a double. And fall off times freq is other adjustments I've made to try to make this thing work. And input sample equals mid boost times PS. Interesting. So we're scaling it. Do we want to be scaling it? Let's assume we're not. And is max on one of our controls? Kinda. Yeah, max is our parameter 2. So that's basically the length of our little FIR filter there. And the reason we're fussing with it is because it was acting really weird. But Oh no, we had other stuff in here too. Not so worried about that. Oh, I know what I could do. If that really solved the problem with this, because it had something to do with interactions, we can just make max linear now. It's not going to be stepped. It's going to be 0 to 1, which turns into 0 to 100 taps on the delay line. Now 100 taps is not that much if you're talking about 192K and a 20 hertz tone. That doesn't get you very far. But the question is, will we see anything useful out of this? And that, as always, is a fascinating question to which we're going to try to find the answer. Back into the breach. Here's our single sample tick. Load this up again, and first of all, hear that it makes a noise. Absolutely does. This is supposed to give us a sustaining thing which shortens to turn into that tick. Longer it goes, the more of a high Q factor we'll get, because we're sustaining the sort of impulse we're tacking onto it. And that's apparently our highest frequency. That's going to require some adjusting, but for now, it'll do. So that's a high frequency, that's the long stages, and it made this. So this is kind of like what I wanted and kind of not, because remember, I wanted it to have a slower attack. This is still giving me the insta attack going into what is a sustaining thing, although the decay is interesting and amusing to me. It's doing a good job of making a neat little effect there. In fact, that is so damn resonant that what I can do is undo it and then see what we get on some of these other notes. Like my problem, what I'm concerned with here, you can almost hear a note with that. When it becomes low frequencies, and let's normalize that. It starts not giving you the end of the tail, although that went down nice and low, honestly. And yeah, we are in fact skipping prime numbers. Now we're just using everything. So this is kind of what I wanted for an attack, and it's almost acting like what I wanted it to act like. Remember how I said I wanted it to attack fast and then the other frequency becomes slower? Thing is, this is transitioning. I wanted to transition here to the other frequency. This is clearly transitioning here. We have one half of a waveform that's up here, and then this is clearly a slower waveform that's twice the length, and then fading off in the end. Let's confirm that. We'll go slightly higher, enough where we can see a couple of wiggles, and then we'll see whether it's doing the thing. That's higher. And then let's normalize that. That still looks flat. I'm not sure why it looks funny when I use a higher. So here's what we're making now. That's interesting, but I'm not sure if it's what I intended. Nor do I know why there's suddenly a cut one there. So this would be the attack. It's going to go into that attack, and then we have our biggest peak down here. Quit out of there, and let's see what this does. So if double is less than this much, then fx equals sine, else it equals cosine. This is what's sine times 2, else cosine. This is supposed to do my transition. If I was to flip this PS overall scale, do I want to be using? I bet I do. Let's see what it does now. So if the result is larger than that, then the output is the sine that, otherwise it's the cosine that. Let's go back to what I had before now that I've added that additional detail. I'm not sure if you can hear that. The dog next door is misbehaving. You guys are such meme lords. I guess that means you were young, and that's cool. I'm trying to make sense of. I can see the little icons, but only just barely. And I don't know what any of them are. So let's see what we've got. Let us experiment with what changes here. Okay, I kind of like this. See what that is? That's kind of what I was looking for. I'm not sure it's exactly what I was looking for, because what I was looking for really was it should transition over at this point, and then the remainder of that initial little wave needs to be double length. But it's kind of getting there. That's what I intended for it to do. Now if we just undo this, and then convert the sampling rate, if I resample, I lose that tick immediately. So we're not going to do that. Then do it again, no changes. Oh, we have an interesting thing. something in here is still trying to apply this in only some waveforms. So I have some debugging to do. I mean, that's a thing, but it's not especially helpful thing. We're taking roughly every 4 samples, and we're seeing only that. And apart from that, it seems to be roughly about right. It did shift up in frequency. So let's see now, that ain't right, but we're not adjusting frequency. If we adjust frequency like this, that should do about the right thing. So now I am wondering, could I just force it to, like that should have changed, that should have set up the frequency to be correct because we're adjusting that. But now, yeah, so double X times PS, X0, this is applying that filter only at every filter point. We want to be applying the filter at every sample. So what we're going to do is firstly apply this, just get that out of the way. Now we're not even stretching it out in that way. See, I'm kind of thinking to myself of some things I could do with this. But for now, because I feel like it'd make it go stepwise. You probably don't understand what that means, but that's okay. Let's see what this made first of all. There's her low frequency pop. It makes a shape that looks like this. I actually like that quite a bit. What should happen is that as I change it to 192K, it does the same shape, but the length gets shortened radically. And that's something I'll have to work around. But until I work around it, I should be able to make it sort of work. I think that is about, or is it though? That was a very high-pitched noise. Yeah. Yeah, when I switched it up, I got a greatly increased sound. So something ain't supposed to be here. And it's this factor in here. We don't actually want to be recalculating this by ramping it up so steeply. This PS that is overall scale doesn't actually fit. What we're doing is finding a way of making it do the right frequency no matter what sample rate we're at, except for it's going to narrow the window. That's what we're supposed to be doing with this. And I just thought of something interesting that I could do. But we'll worry about that in a moment. Firstly, let's see if we have our frequencies. We are not even dealing with musical signals yet, because I trust that it's going to be what I want. Sort of mid-rangey. Good, good. Same thing, same frequency. I'm going to say that probably is. Let's go find out. See, here's the problem I was trying to avoid. At low sample rates, we could have plenty of the waveform to work with. At high sample rates, it's pretty much all going away. We don't have many waves left in here. It's just all, it's immediately nothing. And I can demonstrate that further by showing you that if we have a much higher frequency, here's our highest frequency for now. We can now see that that is got a bit of a waveform. I don't think I can really scale it usefully, but half a millisecond gets you this much wiggle on the waveform, and the shape of it is about right. Same thing. Half a millisecond, and oh my god, look at that. We have a much longer sustain. But the wave, the wiggle is about the same, I think. Yeah. So what we're shooting to do is starting by having our and I don't know whether I'm going to need to. I want the shape to be the same no matter what frequency rate I'm at. I want to have either this many samples in here or block them out differently. I want to undo all of these and quit. And I was thinking I might be able to do the high sample rate stuff in a interesting way. So B count is our sustain. P we're not using. In fact, I'm willing to get rid of that at this point. I don't believe it's going to be helpful. It was a fun experiment, but it will not matter now. I'm thinking pre-delay is still going to relate. Oh, you know what? I should be able to I think I should be able to make this work. See, B is going to be that. F as many as 100 taps. B is a moving buffer, so we don't need to scale it, thankfully. An earlier version of this, I was moving everything into adjacent places in the buffer one by one, which is terrible. Just for distributing the samples over a different place. Times you know what? I can steal something out of recent projects for this. I know some of this stuff undersamples, and I use my undersampling code for things. This is a good place to use it. Just put this in here. Hi, we're not using that anymore, are we? But I bet we'll use this. And, oh, I needed to have another thing. How did I do that? How did I do that? Oh, it's me, Freyskin. It's me. Shame on me. Oh, cycle was supposed to be 0. Okay. And it would be an int, so yep. So that does appear to be how that works. And let's see, so now we've got that, we've got cycle, which we use for undersampling, which does not mean we're going to be using it, but this is where cycle end might be the one that I'm sticking for. So I might have just not needed to put that in at all. Let one. Cycle end. Now if I do this, we're doing mid boost. So our spacing, we're starting with just ones. We're counting 1 to 100, just like that. But if we're at double sample rate, it's going to be at 2. And so we count from 0 to 200 instead of 100. And then we measure if it is actually going to wrap around, and if we do, then we extend it. And then we apply the thing. We should be able to get another one where it's stacked up. And I have a scheme for what to do about that. But firstly, let's see what this did. Back to our Dirac. I always forget that. This is called a Dirac impulse. The one sample impulse is called the Dirac impulse. Let's pick a nice little high frequency. Bing. Check to make sure that it works right. Yep. You can see you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 waveforms. And this frequency now we're going to make it be 192K. Run the same thing. So we're at a low frequency now for no good reason. But before let's firstly see what it even did. That is well spaced out, every 4 spaces, and our frequency is not at all right. Our frequency is like a quarter of the frequency it's supposed to be, but it's still kind of sort of doing the thing. Again, remember that this is meant to do a high frequency sound. It might be Dirac of BBC fame, I don't know. Paul Dirac? That might very well be the same Dirac. Oh wait, I bet I know what I have to do. If freq is not divided by overall scale after all, let's reconstruct that experiment. I would have thought I would need to scale that, but maybe not. Maybe the way it's set up, that's not a thing I even need to be concerned about doing. High frequency and 12 waveforms, clearly. I wasn't counting them, I just remember that's what I had before. Now if we do 192K, and then apply it, hello, that's the same pitch. That's what I wanted, was for it to be the same pitch. And you could say, oh hey, great, you're done, that works, except it's not, because that stuff is right. All of these details are correct and doing exactly what I want, except for almost everything is actually the center. We're taking only one of every 4 spaces. So what I think I might want to do is similar to something that I do when smoothing when smoothing control inputs. If this was zipper noise, you'd be getting a crackle because these would be the only inputs that you had, and then they would jump abruptly to another one. And I could make it do that. But what I could also do is record the previous one and sort of chase to the next one by however many spaces there are. So that might work. In which case it'll draw a straight line between each of these, and that should be adequate, I think. That's like what my undersampling code does that. So I've actually got the code for it. And I was just looking at that code. Let's go back here. So this is very much the number of taps that we're using. Oh, this is just the setup. This part's fine. There is no problem with this part at all, other than maybe I want to adjust this. Let's do a cheeky quick little hack and see what this makes. It may make a big mess. Let's find out. So if I was to do this, pick a lower frequency, and we just made a little change. This is what now happens. Looks like this bump is quicker. It's changing over faster, and it's like it's making a funny change here. That's actually not supposed to happen. I want it to go quickly to this and then transition over to this slow waveform at the high point of this wave, which it is not yet doing. Instead, it's wrapping around, and then see this little, it's overly straight here, and then it's no longer a sine-like contour in this. That's not what I want. What would happen if we just used pi for this? I'm assuming at some point it breaks and becomes something else. I just don't know at what point it breaks and becomes something else. Like it draws a thing and then part of the waveform is completely in the wrong place or something. I'm expecting something like that. Chirp. Ah, see, that's what I was telling you. It's possible for it to break and become something else. The attack is just fine, kinda, but then it's wrapping around at this higher rate and transitioning to the sine with the discontinuity here. So, yeah, not so much. That's good and broken. That was a little more well behaved. I bet there's no 3. Fall off is gonna be correct no matter how I set it. X starts at 0, it's supposed to scale up. I wanted to change over, is there an 8? No. 4 switched over too quickly. 2 might be correct. Because you see what it's doing? It's like double X times frequency times 2 means that's giving us a sign that is half the rate. Whereas this is just me thinking about a bunch of mathematical things that I don't truly understand. Like, I understand them, but I have to arrive at these things through experimenting rather than being like, oh, logically, you look up this thing in the book and then it says this. So it's like I could do weird stuff like multiply it by -2 or have this be the cosine and the other thing be the sine. Or reverse the behaviors. Do we even want this? It leans in high frequencies a lot, but I'm not convinced I want that there. Fall off should be enough. So we just screwed this up in a couple of different ways to see what happens. And we're completely on a side path from what it originally was. We are getting a nice loud peak this way. And this is apparently what happens when you swap differently and reverse the, see, sine versus cosine this way. What that meant was this. Now this part of it is going twice as fast as it used to, so it's a higher frequency. This part of it is going half as fast as it used to, but instead of starting at 0, it's starting at max. It's using the cosine function instead of the sine function. So what's happening is we're immediately peaking out really high, going instantly to that, and then going to a much lower frequency, which could be more easily demonstrated at a lower frequency. That's a lower frequency. See, this is what we made it do. Instead of having the attack that is softened and turning into the sine wave type behavior, we've got an attack that is softened and then delayed. And then it's transitioning into the sine wave type behavior. So that's interesting and weird. The question is whether it relates to what our audio is supposed to be doing, which ain't necessarily so. But this is what you get when you lead off with the cosine part of it rather than the sine part of it. It's just going whack and then converting over. Although there are some interesting side effects here. And one of them is it's exactly double the frequency. So what we're getting is a funny sort of shape that is taking up the same spacing as the rest of this. I really want to look up those impulses now, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. It's information I used to have. But here's the thing. The stuff that I just did translates into audio like this. I guess I do have to multiply by freq after all. It becomes overwhelming otherwise. This is going to require a little bit of research, I feel. I might just de-stream and go off and do that for however much it takes. But for now, let's hear some of what this did. High frequency. And you start taking out the stages. Because our initial attack is a full-strength sample, same as the Dirac impulse. We can now go down to low frequencies, and it's kind of acting like a filter, and it's kind of acting like a mid, but it's also kind of not. Here's our dry wet. And here's what is supposed to be our mid-range. Okay, here's a thought. If this was part of that EQ algorithm, so rather than just doing it using a dry wet, stage was also acting like a dry wet, what would that be like? Well, we'd be doing this with it, but then we would be overlaying the dry wet onto it, and that would be how we got the amount of boost that we added. So if stages was here, dry was here, I don't hate it. Stages was here. So that's pretty interesting. One thing about it is interacting with dry wet better than anything else I did. Let's quit out of this and fool around a little more. If we use the sine variation of it, see, this is what's interesting me, is that if I do it in this way that's making the waveform start at a 1, that's a weird discontinuity. That's not great, but it might sound okay. And that means I can scale it down any amount I want, although I haven't really finished that either. But, so if we just only do this, not just only that, and we treat that as undesirable, we're probably locking in on the frequency more tightly. And the curve we get out of it and this is also faster to calculate, although that doesn't make that much of a difference. This is only happening once per sample buffer. This is the bit that I was going to do the undersampling thing with. But right now we're just experimenting with what it sounds like to start this generated impulse response that acts like a sine wave. Let's start it at its highest point. We can demonstrate it as doing that by doing the Dirac impulse again. Maximum stages. Full wet. And our result is that. So that's about right. It looks a little sketchy, but that is what we're supposed to be getting. And then at a much lower frequency, we've still got very much our sine shape. Oh, we scaled it. We don't necessarily want to scale it that much. I am tempted to go and try remedying that, because that can't be right. We're doing times freq. Freq goes just too low. How about square root of freq? Sometimes that kind of thing works out. Because I know I want it to be louder in the bass, but I don't want it to be as loud as it could be if I was just doing it at full crank. I still wanted to do something, but maybe not as much as all that. So we're minimizing the amount of difference that makes. Now what? Hey, Fulcomas. I'll be feeling better about all of this stuff eventually. I think I might not do my coding stream next week, if you don't mind. Those of you who show up for this, I think I might not do the coding stream next week, and I'll just try to, I've got the studio rebuilding that's underway, And I'll just sort of bury myself in that for a bit. Let's see. Hello. That feels better already. And so here is our lower frequency. It is a consistent note, and it's the Dirac impulse going straight into the waveform as it goes. So there we have it. And that's adjusted according to pitch. So now let's load up a sound. Full with that, and if this sounds cool, I will call that a decent work day for the live streaming and stuff. We do have very loud mids in this, so that might be part of what's causing that. There we have a very loud, low, bassy kind of thing. And of course, this is very resonant. This is what it really is. So we don't really want that much resonance. I'm not sure you quite understand what I'm doing. That's some loud bass. Let's do another little quick change while we're at it, i.e., let's not use a power function for this. Back to the same thing. High. Low. So this makes it a good presence peak thing. Although I feel like it should be able to go higher than that. That doesn't make any sense. Why is it not going higher than that? Oh, are we not applying this everywhere it needs to be applied? We're not applying this everywhere it needs to be applied. Cosine, but x times freq needs to also be, oh no, this is just fall off. So that is working correctly. And the reason it's not doing what I want is because this is not a biquad filter. This doesn't only go up to 0.5 and be done. In order to make it hit a higher pitch, I need to make freq go to a higher number. So times, well, let's call it 2. How about? That'll make that happen. Oh, let's get even funkier. Instead of 1, we go to 3.14. Or no, how about there? Let's see where that gets us. There's no feedback anywhere in here. Yeah, that's the thing. This might be me finding a way of making the Q less sharp, although I do want a very sharp Q for the MCI one. Like if I can start getting sounds like Talking Heads kick drums and AC/DC guitars out of this algorithm, I'll know that it's on the right track, because a bunch of famous stuff came off of MCI boards with this analog filter that was a resonant peak filter. Let's see how we're doing as far as going up to a higher pitch. There we go. Like in those highs. Now let's convert this to 192K, make this laptop sad for a bit, and hear what happens when we try to do the same thing. I think we've got some of this worked out. I do want to adjust the... Do not save that. Keep it the same way. I'm going to put back this. Partly. We're going to put some taper into this, but not too much. And then we're probably can also add something, but I'm not that worried about that right now. Don't need to worry about this stuff anymore. Technically, I don't need to worry about that at all. Sample tick was in fact elucidating. Not needing cycle for anything. So that can actually go away. Down here. $100 filter taps. Nice big bass spacing. This is starting to fall into place. Only thing I haven't done with it is the undersampling thing. And I will. But right at the moment, I'm not sure that's where I'm going with this. Don't mind me sitting here thinking. So, haven't completely resolved about this, but I might be ready to commit to this. Oh. Hang on. I'm not using any of that. Build succeeded. Moving the project forward. Back into here. How's our frequency sweep feeling? That's bright. Silencio. That's real sharp. What happens when I have very little of this? So I can set it so that it's doing nothing but the initial Dirac impulse. Then as I add more, so I feel like maybe a dry-wet behavior in there might be useful too. Because it's going down to something which, like, firstly, let me make it so that it can definitely go down to exactly just 1. And then let me taper it this way. So if we always have max be at least 1, then we're always applying at least one of these. Dry-wet is another issue, and we're going to want to crossfade this a little more than it is. But let's call this something else. In this case, we want this to be input sample. We want the mid boost to be the output result. No longer care about dry-wet right now. We're making this be the effect. And this is one of our inverse tapers. And that should work. And then we're going to rename it. Mid boost, eh? Well, amount peak can be the amount of mid-range peak we are adding, and we're scaling it all. Ideally, we'd be applying this to the literal mid-range, and it'll just kind of focus that stuff the way we want it. Let's find out how well this works. Unused variable, eh? Okay. So the idea is there will be an EQ around this. There'll be a bass control. There'll be a brights control, independent of any brightness adding that you can do here. And this is the mid-range boost thing. And I believe what I've got here oh, wait, no. Jumped a little too soon. The whole point of this was that I needed to load these together. It's like a dual gang pot. See, this is our mid boost control. And it includes that max thing, which is controlling how intensely you can make that turn into a really narrow boost, and also a degree of dry wet, which is also contributing how it works around that. Oh, this only does boosts. The MCI thing only does boosts. The MCI thing does not do cuts. That said, that's kind of what that is, although I'm not sure as clean as in the idea is you should be able to crank it to where it is a very sharp point. And that's exactly what we're looking for, because some of these sounds we're talking about are really notable behavior. Let's see. And it's 1:28. I've gone half an hour. I'm not going to go more than 3 hours. So if it goes beyond 2, everybody leave and make me shut down. But for now, we're still playing. Right? Peace. Now here's what happens when we isolate stuff like that and then start including it. There's a heavy emphasis on that mid-range point. It's doing a good job at identifying those lower mid-ranges. Here's where it starts getting good and bright. I think we can scale this even more. In particular, we don't need stages to go up as fast as this. That's really aggressive. That said, this is one way to get the heinous, like, point on the kick and stuff. Aggressive. You can just about drag a click attack on the kick out of this, and that's insane. So let's quickly go and do the thing I was talking about. I'm not sure, honestly, and I'm not really the guy that you would ask for getting much more accurate. If you were doing the compiler sign and arc sign, I would run it on like long double variables or something if you were trying to make it really be brutally accurate. I'm honestly not sure that's even useful for you, but go figure. So let's see, max, get parameter 3. Amount, let's scale that as well. And then frequency, that's going to be fine. Pitches are about fine. I haven't done the thing I said I was going to do, but that's okay. Let's see what we made. So this should be a lot cleaner. Get up to about a half, and boy, it's already extreme. Oh, aggressive. That bass string, damn. I might just leave it like this, or maybe a little less. Yeah, anything past 5 is like, damn. Super bright. Now let's play with the little alien kittens to see where it's at so far. So stock. Let's get that mid-range on the snare. And then way too resonant. That high note. I'm going to see whether that is still there in the 96K and the 192K. That's the note. Alrighty. I think we got there. I think this is going to be usable as mid-range control. Maybe a little further fussing, and I got to dial it in to make it resemble what the MCI acted like in practice. But on the whole, this is a pretty good day. So on that ground, I will call it a day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. And again, I think I'm going to be skipping the live stream. These have been running over time every single time and becoming just journeys of discovery. I'll get back to this, but I'm going to skip next week. I'll see you folks later.